It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. With me today, Conservative MP Craig McKinley, the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, political consultant and former Conservative advisor Salma Shah, and contributing editor of Navarro Media, Ash Sarkar. Today, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi commits to net zero carbon emissions, but not until 2070.
There's a very simple way of expressing the desire to keep 1.5 alive and survive at 1.5. And that's to make this sign. You already know this. You got that, Tariq. Did you know that, Narendra? You did already. I was a new one on me anyway. I want to do it now. Keep 1.5 alive, everybody.
So the problem we've got is that an awful lot of the wipes that are flushed down the toilet shouldn't be.
Is it time to ban plastic from wet wipes?
Welcome to Manchester.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And levelling up. Who needs it most?
We think we can help the government define levelling up and deliver levelling up.
Hello. Well, I want to start with something which has been in the news for the past couple of days, and this is the row between the UK and France over licences for French fishing boats. Just take a look at the front page of this headline in the Daily Mail, which says, after le showdown, now it's le surrender. This is talking about the fact that France says it's not going to go ahead with threats it made to possibly block British boats unloading their catches at French ports, possibly disrupting cross-channel trade. Instead, the talks are going to continue. So, Craig, is it le surrender?
Well, I think it's the start of an ongoing battle. I mean, let's get to, realistic on this. This is a background for Macron's re-election campaign, and to be beastly to perfidious Albion is always a popular move in France. But France is looking at the wrong place. It signed the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with an EU treaty, under which fishing is an EU right to negotiate on France and the other member states' behalf. And so it cannot, under any international law, do these sort of things unilaterally. And how you can have a linkage between a row over fishing, I mean, at the end of the day, we have agreed 98% of these small fishing licences. The 2% remaining, subject to the dispute, are ones that couldn't prove that they had grandfather rights in the past. So it's a pretty small amount. To then link that over with closing Calais and closing ports, I wonder what the just-in-time vegetable and salad growers in Spain would think about that, who are very reliant on the British market. So I think France is going a very long way and quick way of falling out with its friends in the EU in this type of sabre rattling. OK,
Ash, what do you think? Is it le surrender?
Well, we've got two leaders who are playing to audiences at home, and Macron, like you said, has one eye on the 2022 election. He's also thinking about positioning within the EU with Angela Merkel stepping down, and thinks that by playing a bit of a tough guy, that's a way to cement his position both domestically and on the stage of the EU. One of the things that I would say is that British fishing is facing a double squeeze. One is from the fact that you have this matter of, France rattling its sabres, the problem of exporting to the EU. But then the other side of it is that some of these, post-Brexit trade deals have squeezed British fishermen by making it cheaper to import from far-flung countries such as New Zealand when it comes to the mussels. So I don't think that it's fair to say that the pressures on British fishing are all the fault of Macron. I think that's a significant part of it. I think there has also been an element of Boris Johnson playing tough with Macron, but on the other side, selling UK fishermen down the river when it comes to trade deals.
Andy, do you think that this is pure politics?
I think Ash got it right then. I think there's an element of both sides playing to the gallery, particularly the French side. Feels there's an overreaction there linked to the forthcoming French election. So what I would say is it's good that the whole situation is being de-escalated. If this is how we're going to go, though, with Brexit, that both sides will use, or any countries will use any issue to play to domestic audiences, that's just going to disrupt more than the fishing industry. We're all going to be constantly in a period of turbulence. So we kind of have to move the politics out of this, just get these arrangements working. And this little incident, I think, has kind of shown how you know, we may be always trapped in the general election battles of other countries if we're not careful.
Salma, do you think this is just going to carry on?
I think there'll probably be a de-escalation of this particular issue, but, you know, we're a couple of months away from a French presidential election, and as we've already discussed, you know, Macron is being squeezed by the right and the left is in disarray. So I don't want to sound completely cynical, but it does seem like a really interesting way of creating a dividing line for Macron and his domestic audience, because the numbers of fishing boats that are involved are so minuscule for him to turn this into such a big political issue that even the EU doesn't back him on, I think suggests that, you know, he is playing quite serious politics here.
Well, it sounds like the verdict from our panel is that this may have some time to run. But I just want to go to, of course, what is the other big story of this week, and that is the COP climate talks, which are taking place in Glasgow. I want to show you the front page of The Guardian, if we can take a look at that. Have we got the headline? Front page of The Guardian. This says, COP26, world leaders agree deal to save Earth's forests. Now, this is talking about a deal that has been done with world leaders who have promised to end and reverse deforestation by 2030. We can get more on this now with our political correspondent, Adam Fleming, who is one of those who is at the COP Climate Summit in Glasgow for us. Adam, welcome. Hello. Can you explain how significant is this deforestation deal?
Yeah, it seems pretty big because it covers 85% of the world's forests. And the idea is that by 2030, deforestation in those areas will stop and then, in fact, get reversed because new trees and new greenery will be planted to replace ones that were taken away. Now, this will also be backed up, by the way, by £15 billion worth of funding, some of which will come from governments, some of which will come from private donors, and some of which will come from companies. But the fly in the ointment, if you like, in the celebrations of all of this is that this was actually a pledge that was first signed by an initial group of countries in 2014. Now, in 2021, it now includes Brazil and China, who weren't on there before. But if it doesn't kick in until 2030, that's 16 further years where quite a lot of deforestation could happen. And like a lot of the pledges that we're seeing at COP, whether it's carbon reductions or methane reductions or introduction of technology or money, it is not happening straight away, which means the situation could get slightly worse or a lot worse before the situation starts getting better.
OK, well, Adam, you're talking about things that might take a while to come to fruition. Let's just take a look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph, which says India's 2070 net zero pledge catches COP on the hop. This is referring to the fact that India has committed to reaching net zero, but not until 2070, which is some 20 years later than certainly the UK is aiming for. Adam, how's that going down there?
Well, when you talk to COP insiders, the people organising the conference and actually running it, they were quite surprised by that. The word that they used was curious. They think there's a bit of domestic politics going on there in India, maybe a little bit of expectation management. And actually, over the decades, that target will inevitably be brought forward in their assessment. And they're accentuating the positive. They say, look at the big pledges Modi made about boosting hugely the amount of renewable energy India will use in the next 8, 9, 10 years. And actually, I was just talking to the former president of the Maldives, who represents the climate vulnerable group, which is the big group of countries who are already feeling the effects of climate change now. And he said he ran India's 2030 commitments through his spreadsheet on his laptop last night. And he thinks actually they could keep the world close to 1.5 degrees C of warming, which is the most ambitious target in the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So he, somebody who is really already feeling the effects of climate change in the country he used to be the head of state of, is actually with the COP lot, and he's accentuating the positive from President Modi rather than focusing on the more negative thing about the net zero target for 2070. But having said that, Boris Johnson, one of his headline pledges is getting the world to go to net zero for 2050. People were already disappointed that China were going for 2060 and the EU were going for 2055. 2070 does seem like a little bit of a smack in the face.
OK, Adam, thank you. Adam, thank you for sorting your own tech there as well, by the look at it. Now we can go to a different part of the Glasgow COP conference with an actual camera. Andy, what do you make of this announcement from India? Do you view it as a positive, or do you think it's disappointing?
I think it's positive that they've set a target, so that's a step forward. But obviously, this isn't the date that anybody here would have wanted to hear. But I think Adam was making a really important point just now, and that is it's the next decade that counts. This decade that we're in now is the one that needs to see real acceleration, significant increase in the pace of change. And that seems to be what India is proposing, if the anecdote there about the Maldives president is right. So that's encouraging. I think on our side, Rachel Reeves has put out a plan to invest billions over the next 10 years. And I think that's what the UK needs to be doing now. We need to give real clarity about the 2021 to 2031 period in this country. We have a plan in Greater Manchester to be net zero by 2038. And that needs to be backed now with significant money that we can predict is going to come year after year, so we can get on with retrofitting people's homes. I think it will also require more devolution of power out of Westminster if we're to get to 2038. I also think it will need greater control, public control of sectors like transport, energy and housing. So I don't think we've got all of that in place yet. So we shouldn't be pointing the finger at India ourselves until our own house is in order. And I don't think our own house is in order yet. Maybe it will be by the end of COP.
OK, we'll come back to what the UK is doing in a moment, but I just want to stick on India. And Craig, what do you make of what India said about its commitments?
Well, the only thing that I've heard that's good that's come out of COP so far is the reforestation plan. I mean, all the rest of it, frankly, it's the same old conference saying the same old things that we've heard very, very many times in the past. It feels like Groundhog Day. India probably has no great desire to go up this route because it is still on a growth path for its vast populations that wants what we've had and enjoyed. They'll want air conditioning, cars and all the rest of it. And if they were to commit themselves to a faster plan, probably just a plan that will never be met anyway, then the growth of that country would be seriously stilted. I mean, I'm very concerned about the negativity, the doom-mongering, the minute to midnight and all of this stuff. I don't think it's selling well with the public. I mean, I've been doing a lot of analysis over the last few weeks about the real cost to the public. I mean, Andy said about the cost. He wants billions and billions up until 2038 and a bit of a power grab by the regional authorities as well. This has got to be paid for. This has to be paid for in tax.
Let's come back to that
and
point.
I didn't become a Conservative to make my constituents colder and poorer.
We'll come back to that point. But Ash, just respond to that, if you will.
If in 2070, 1/5 of the planet is too hot for people to live on, how do you think they'll look back on this time and squabbling over costs? They'll look back at this time and say, what, you had this window of 10 years to take action and you didn't because, what, you didn't have enough money? I think that's a silly way to frame it.
India's not going to do it.
When it comes to, wait, hang on a second. When it comes to India, by 2070, half of India's population could be living under temperatures which are too hot for people to live in. So there is an incentive, other than simple economic growth, for India to rapidly decarbonise, to pursue renewables aggressively, and this target of 50% renewables by 2030 is something which is really welcome. There are models in developing and middle-income nations for going straight to solar, for skipping out a lot of the dirty fossil fuel burning and going straight to solar in order to drive economic growth. We know that China is one of the world's biggest polluters. One of the things that people don't talk about is that China has got greater domestic solar capacity than Europe and America put together. So there are models for India to follow. Narendra Modi, I think, has been remarkably cowardly in setting a 2070 target, and what I hope is that through international pressure, through Britain leveraging its position as a trading partner with India, you can force the Indian government and governments to come to bring forward that target so that we can meet 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature.
Well, I mean,
change.
I've got a certain number of measures on which I'm sort of judging, the heat pumps, all the rest of the stuff that we're hearing, the battery cars. Does it give us energy security? That has got to be key. It's got to be key for our country. It's got to be key for India as well. Why would they be wanting to probably import solar panels and wind technology from China, where they have currently a cheap supply of coal under its feet? I mean, that is a very, very big political dynamic, I'm sure, for Modi to be thinking about. Is it affordable? Affordability has got to be key. Let's not forget that cheaper energy and capitalism has taken 1 billion people out of poverty around this planet.
And solar is only getting cheaper. Solar and hydro are only getting cheaper in a way that fossil fuels aren't.
Of course,
in a way that fossil fuels
cheaper
aren't.
over time. But
No, but they are getting cheaper.
My worry is we're jumping into this sort of unknown technologies. Let me give you an example. And this is we can all take part in this one. Do you remember those funny little light bulbs we were all encouraged to buy a short while ago? Those fluorescent twirly ones. I've got a drawer full of them. They were the interim technology that wasn't the final solution, and the final solution was LED. I'm very worried that we're jumping into solar and renewables and heat pumps and batteries, where the actual solution will be probably a nuclear solution in time, because you can have the opportunity for cheaper energy to allow your populations to grow.
I want to bring in Salma. Salma, do you think that Boris Johnson's got a bit of a problem here? Because the ambition for this COP is to keep this idea of 1.5 degrees warming alive. Already we've got India pushing their date to 2070.
There's definitely a mismatch between the rhetoric and the reality, and that was always going to be the case when you have such so many variable countries. I mean, for India to push out its climate target, I agree, is absolutely disappointing. But we also have to understand that India's systems are different to ours. It's not as sophisticated. The way that they sort of are able to use their systems through their regional setup is also going to be difficult. So even if Narendra Modi comes here, he's got to talk to the chief ministers in various other regions to be able to actually implement this plan. And it comes back to the central question, which is, you know, we all sort of agree that we need to get to this point, but it's in the how. And India's capacity and ability to be able to manage that is going to be restricted in comparison to the Western world.
May I very quickly add to that? The problem is that winning slowly in the context of climate change is the same as losing. And one of the problems is that we look at COP26, we see it as countries negotiating with each other. That's not quite the case. With every compromise and every climb down, you are making a compromise with climate devastation. And I think one of the things that's really important with this country is to be a leader. The fact is that we got rich because we were first on the fossil fuel game, all right? And climate change, it's a cumulative project, all right? Our carbon that we emitted during the Industrial Revolution, it's still there. We've got the opportunity to show real leadership, and I don't think that this government is doing everything it can. We're still exploring oil for Cambo. We're still thinking about new coal mines. We just cut tax on domestic flights. That's an act of climate vandalism. And so why should poorer or more developing countries
come back briefly on that, Craig, and then I want to bring in Andy.
The coal mine is really bizarre. I mean, I want to leave this planet in a better place than we found it. I'm very conscious of food miles when I go in the supermarket, but we don't seem to be conscious of coal miles. And you know very well the coal mine that is, you know, in proposal is for one purpose only, it's for steel production. If we don't produce it domestically, it'll be imported from Russia or Australia.
OK, let's bring in Andy.
I mean, let's get some sense of proportion.
Andy.
I just wanted to come back on Craig's complaint about people in the regions seeking billions of pounds of investment. Could I just remind you, Craig, your government made a commitment to level up the north of England with the south. So, you know, we're just asking for what you've already promised us. What I'm saying is the drive to net zero could be the route to levelling up. It could be the route to better public transport for people in the north. It could be the route to better homes for people here. It could actually help reindustrialise the north of England, and that's why you should be putting forward that investment. Ash is right. You know, to prioritise lowering airfares just before this summit was completely the wrong signal to send. You should, as a government, instead be saying to the rest of England, you can all have London-level bus fares, £1.55 a journey. It can cost over £4 in our city region to catch a bus. You should be levelling us up in that way and not sort of arguing against the funding. You stood on a manifesto to promise it to us.
You got a generous settlement last week,
and you change here when it costs less to catch a plane than it does to catch a train, and when it costs less to get a taxi than it does to get a bus. The economics of transport in the English regions are all wrong, and your government really needs to get on with changing it, because you promised us you would.
Well, you got a good settlement last week and you were delighted with that, and I'm very pleased.
We're going to talk more about levelling up in a minute, but let's just stick on this idea of net zero at the moment. And Craig, you said you think there is going to be a cost to people. Yep. Let's just take a look, if we can, at this Telegraph article, which is talking about a poll that happened last week on the idea of a referendum on the UK government's plan to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Have we got the Telegraph headline there? No, this one says public want a referendum on Boris Johnson's net zero plans by next general election. Craig, is that an idea you like?
It's an interesting proposal. I mean, we don't have a written constitution in this country. We can have referendums for a variety of reasons. We've gone up the route of referendums over the last few decades for constitutional issues. one could argue this is such an expensive, long-term project that's going to straddle a number of parliaments. It perhaps does get into that field of we need to ask the public on this because...
It was in the Conservative manifesto.
You stood on that manifesto, Craig.
I did.
For a 2015 net zero commitment.
I
every
did.
political
but not
party
doing
in
it
this
this
country,
way.
apart from
not
UKIP,
doing it this way.
Every single political party in this country, apart from UKIP, had a net zero pledge. There is a clear
Don't you think that's a bit worrying in a
mandate
democracy
for it.
when all the parties are saying the same thing and there's obviously a disconnect between that
also
and what
all
the
of them
public
say having an
are
NHS
thinking?
is good. That's also a good thing. There is consensus on issues of national importance, and that can sometimes reflect something positive and not something malevolent or weird.
What do you
and
think that poll was showing? I think it was showing, 42% wanted a referendum, 30%...
I think it shows that the Telegraph is trying to put pressure on your boss, Mr Johnson, to climb back
didn't want a referendum.
To climb back on his net zero
if you
pledge.
took out the don't knows, we're up to 58% wanted a referendum, which suggests to me that there is some call for it. I know it's only a limited poll and all the rest of it, but perhaps something that needs to be explored because, you know, on these issues that have got multi-parliament session effects going way into the future, where there seems to be broad accord across the parties, sometimes I think it's the public needs to be involved in this.
Sam, there is a point about the fact the public is going to have to be taken on this journey because people are going to have to make some personal changes, aren't they? Do you think that Boris Johnson's been upfront about that?
So I don't think that people have actually, in government, really explored the consequences for the average person and the average family, because when you go into government, you know, you're basically working through what you've promised in your manifesto, and then the trade-offs come. And I think the reality is, Ash, I couldn't disagree with you at all on the idea that we need to take a stand and we need to do it now. But the entire point is that the public have to come with us, because if they don't, you know, you're actually at risk of being exploited by people who want political power, who are not going to be on the climate agenda, and people wanting to believe that that is possible. So I think we have to be realistic that persuasion also means that we have to listen to people's concerns about the cost.
I completely agree, and I think that some climate measures can also bring down the cost of living for people, and this is one of the things that I'm really interested in. The area that I live in Tottenham, I see every day people queuing up for food banks, struggling with the cost of living, struggling with the cost of heating their own homes in the wintertime. And something like, and I know that people really hate Insulate Britain because of blocking the roads, but you could take them off the roads tomorrow by meeting this demand of retrofitting every housing association and social housing home with insulation by 2030 would do two things. One, it would save some of the most deprived families in this country an awful lot of money on their energy costs. Two, it would help us in terms of transitioning away from the reliance on gas. It would give us a bit more time to bring in the heat pumps. And three, it would bring down our carbon emissions. That is a win, a win, and a win. And the fact that people have taken so much issue with Insulate Britain's tactics and they're not talking about the justice of their demand and how it makes sense economically for families in this country, I think is a real failure of both our politics and our media.
No, I don't disagree with insulating homes, but the costs. Let me just give something that the London Council's come up with just about 3 weeks ago. The cost of decarbonising homes in London, just 14% of the entirety of the housing stock in the UK, is 98 billion. Scale that up across the country, 700 billion. That amounts to something about £30,000 per household.
Okay.
You've got a choice. Do you pay it yourself as taxpayers, or do you get the government to try and subsidise it in one way or another? At the end of the day, it's the same pot. Very, very expensive.
Andy, do you think people in Greater Manchester would be prepared to shoulder some of the cost of the move to net zero?
Well, this is the point that I'm making. I think that if you ask people to do that, it could widen inequality. So the drive to net zero could leave us with an even less equal country. At the end of it, a bigger north-south divide than the one that we already have. And I think Ash put it very well just a moment ago. This is an opportunity to lower the cost of living for people in some of the less affluent parts of the country by giving them much cheaper public transport, homes that cost less to run, cars, if they have to have them, that cost less to run. This is the opportunity. But there's two ways of the drive to net zero, isn't there? You either fund it properly and do it properly and then narrow those inequalities and level up the country, or you don't fund it and you make individuals bear the cost, and then you will end up with an even more unequal country. So that's the kind of place that we're at the moment. And I'm not seeing yet, although Craig was right, we got a good announcement in the budget on public transport, but one announcement does not level up the north of England with the south.
OK, just hold that thought. We'll come back to that, Craig, I assure you. We'll come back to that. But for now, I want to talk about another element of the environmental story which is around today. It's not just carbon reduction. Take a look at this from Ione Wells.
We use wet wipes all the time, don't we? To wipe our surfaces, to take our makeup off, to clean up after kids. They're pretty sturdy things, but a lot of them end up on our riverbanks.
The Thames riverbank near Battersea Bridge looks like a normal riverbank, but peel at the surface of the ground and it's covered in wet wipes that have overflowed from our drains.
So it's not just sand, it's sand that's held together by wipes.
Chris Cood works for the charity Thames 21 that clean up the Thames riverbed.
So the problem we've got is that an awful lot of the wipes that are flushed down a toilet shouldn't be. Obviously a lot of material like makeup wipes, cleaning wipes are much tougher and have plastic fibres in them that make them much stronger, and that means they don't break down when they get into your sewage system in the same way. They just fall apart slowly, but they're still very tough, and you can see almost binding together like string. They change the shape of the riverbed, they break down into the pieces, smaller pieces that animals can eat.
The wet wipes that don't end up on our riverbanks and in our rivers end up here in our sewage system, and that can lead to all kinds of other problems, like blocking the sewers themselves.
This footage shows wet wipes being pulled from one sewer by Thames Water. They merge with oil and grease to form blockages.
So what we're seeing here is the end point of what happens when wet wipes and other unflushables get put into our wastewater network. As you can see, they've been through quite a rigorous treatment process at this point, and even now you can see that they are quite visibly still wet wipes. You can pick those out quite easily. The system is not designed to take plastics of this nature. It's 3 Ps only down the toilet, pee, poo and paper.
Thames Water are working with the Labour MP for Putney, Fleur Anderson, who's trying to change the law to ban plastics from wet wipes.
So 90% of wet wipes have actually got plastic in. I think lots of people don't realise they're a single-use plastic. Those wet wipes clog up our sewers and drains, and we've been here seeing the result of that. So that puts more money on our water bills as well. If only the wet wipe companies would just change the way that they make wet wipes, and it's very easy to do, then that would be a huge environmental benefit, but also a financial benefit to us all.
The government say they're looking at the effects of wet wipes with plastics on sewers to try and find solutions. In general, they prefer to help people and companies to make better choices rather than banning items, so we're trying to raise awareness about how to dispose of them properly. But Fleur Anderson says if plastics in wet wipes aren't banned, the build-ups we've seen in these sewers won't go away anytime soon.
That report from Ione Wells. Samuel, I just want to get your thoughts on this, because the government's suggesting it's not going to make this ban right now. It prefers a personal choice. I mean, could you choose to cut down on your wet wipes?
You can, and I might have quite a hormonal response to this, because I'm 7 months pregnant, and the idea of having a newborn baby and not having access to the wet wipes, honestly, the thought of it makes me want to cry. So I think you do have to account for the fact that actually it is a very useful item to have. So banning it, I don't think, is the answer. I mean, obviously in the video, people are talking about how you could possibly change the manufacture of them to make them decompose better, and certainly make people a bit more aware that you can't flush them down the loo, because I think a lot of people probably don't know that.
Andy, would you be up for a ban on plastic wet wipes in Manchester?
I think a ban on anything tends to perhaps alienate people. Regulate them properly is what I would say, and there's going to be a need to have much stronger regulation in law. I think if we're to get to 2050 as a country, 2038 in our case, and this kind of idea that the market will sort it out, that kind of mantra we've had in our country for 20 or 30 years, I'm afraid that has been disproven. If you look at what deregulation has done to the transport system in Greater Manchester, it's left people with fares they can't afford. If you look at housing, it's left people in homes that are not fire safe. This idea that the drive to deregulation and the market will fix it, well, I don't think the market will get us to net zero, and I don't think it will get us to a world where there is barely any plastic waste. So I think, no, maybe ban is not the right way, but you've got to make people change their products so that they don't include plastic. So there's a different type of wet wipe on the market, and that means regulation. And I'm afraid it means the Conservative Party kind of dropping some of this deregulatory rhetoric that they've always had, as far as I can see. They are going to have to accept that regulation of the market is going to have to play a part in getting us to 2050, as is greater public control of those key sectors, transport, energy and housing.
Salma.
Can I just say that we are actually in a Conservative government that's probably been more interventionist than any Conservative government on record. And this is not just about regulating. Actually, the market and responsible business really does care about reducing plastic, not just because of consumer demand, but actually businesses, particularly in the UK, are doing their best to be good corporate entities. And a lot of that is about environmentalism. So I really do take issue with the fact that there's, this idea that Tory deregulation, which actually doesn't exist in the same way, I think it's an old idea, and that the market is just full of people that are only profiteers. I don't think that is true, and I don't think that's been true for a very long time.
It's a mixture, to be honest. To say that they're all wonderful as well and they'll all do the right thing.
No, but it's not right to say that everyone's terrible either and requires regulation to be enforced on them because the market won't change anything. The market is the single most effective way of changing culture and practices. And actually, when the market responded to, say, plastic beads in makeup products, actually they banned it quickly because the market responded to that.
OK, Andy?
Well, I'm just saying to you, 35 years ago, we were told if you deregulate the buses, fares will go down, you'll get more routes, you will get better buses. The exact opposite has happened. Fares have gone through the roof, routes have been cut, the buses are they concentrate on the lucrative routes. That is deregulation. If you look at kind of all those people across the country trapped in homes that have no value, that aren't even safe as a result of the cladding scandal, that is a result of going far too far on deregulation. And to be fair, the government I was in didn't do enough to correct that. So this kind of mantra that we've had about regulation is bad, I personally don't believe it at all. It's going to be needed if we're going to get to this 2050 target.
I just want to bring it back to wet wipes briefly. Ash, would you ban wet wipes?
I would love to come in on wet wipe gate. I mean, it seems to me that you can do something quite simple in terms of legislating to get the plastic out of wet wipes, and you can still wipe your baby's bum until, your heart's content. And that is introducing something like the same way the sugar tax forced fizzy drinks to change their manufacturing practices and to get rid of some of the sugar. I'm sure you could do the same thing to get the plastics out of wet wipes. I do want to come onto this issue about the role that the market plays in dealing with climate change. Certainly, when it comes to helping develop new forms of technology, great. The market does play a role, but the market is also what's brought us here. And the market alone isn't going to sort out some of our really damaging consumer habits, which help drive climate change. One great example of this is the kind of cars that we drive. For every one electric vehicle that's sold in this country, there are 37 SUVs, which we know emit a hell of a lot more carbon, both in terms of when you drive them and also in how you manufacture them. So no, it's not going to be the market alone, because lots of our desires aren't that virtuous. The things we want to buy are often bad for the planet. That's why the state does have to come in, deal with the supply side of that, change how things are manufactured, change how things are made, change our relationship to consumerism. And that's how we can end up having, I think, a more healthy life for ourselves, a more healthy relationship with consumerism, and a more sustainable relationship to the planet as well.
Craig, what do you make of that argument?
Well, a couple of things there. I mean, I don't know how you've overcome the moral dilemma of child labour digging up a lot of these rare earth metals in Congo. I find it, frankly, quite disgusting. But
no, it's not.
Just to go on to Andy Burnham's point, I mean, top marks to Andy. He's managed to swap wet wipes into a whole attack on deregulation and an argument for nationalisation. So well done, Andy. Really, really good. But now, wet wipes. This government, as Salma has said, has put the levy on plastic bags. We've done the action on microbeads in pharmaceutical products. We are on this track. Obviously, I've been to a waterworks, and it is quite phenomenal, the amount of stuff, fairly unspeakable, that gets taken out of our sewage, which shouldn't have been flushed down the toilet in the first place. So that's a bit of education is required. But yeah, I think we should be having a nudge to the manufacturers and to consumers. Some
sort of regulation, you mean?
Yeah, no problem with that. I mean, I rather that COP26 was talking about single-use plastics, was talking about rivers being choked up with plastic, but none of that is on the agenda. These are the sort of things that could be done in the here and now, and we could be getting some successes. We saw it on reforestation. Top marks for that.
Well, what relationship does microplastics in rivers have to carbon emissions, methane, and global heating?
Well, in terms of single-use
plastics, is it just because you're thinking
in terms of single-use plastics,
these are different issues.
In the terms of single-use plastics and the use of oil in a way that really need not be done, I think it's very, very relevant indeed. But yeah, I very much support what the Labour MP is trying to do there. I've seen the damage they cause, but consumers, please don't flush this stuff down the toilet. It's not just wet wipes, shall we say. But as a new mum, I've got a 2.5-year-old. Welcome to the world of wet wipes. They're a lifesaver.
There we are. We've got a public health message from Craig McKinley there in the mix as well. But I do want to move on to something that, Andy Burnham, you've been particularly keen to talk about throughout the programme, and I promised you that we would. This idea of levelling up parts of the country, redistributing economic wealth and opportunity. In the budget last week, the Chancellor announced almost £6 billion in new infrastructure investment for towns and cities outside of London. You must be pretty pleased with the Conservative government.
Yes, it was a positive announcement. It was the money that we'd bid for. But as I said before, that doesn't solve everything. So this is money for infrastructure. We've also got another bid in now, which is money to improve services and critically electrify the bus fleet in Greater Manchester. So I'm the only mayor at the moment that's taken the decision to end deregulation and put buses back under public control. The benefit of that is we can decide now what buses are on our roads. At the moment, the bus operators are deciding that. So I've said to the government, I'm in a unique position to remove a significant amount of carbon from the Greater Manchester economy, the transport economy, over the next 3 years if you back that bid for bus improvement funding. So that one's already in. But we need to go further. We need to get the money into retrofitting. This is where I agree with those demands. I don't agree with the tactics. I think Ash's point before about Insulate Britain, I think the tactics undermine the cause, to be honest, because they lose public support for what is quite a reasonable demand. We're saying give us a levelling up deal. You know, bring all these things together so that we can link zero carbon housing to zero carbon transport. You know, already the trams in Greater Manchester run on renewable energy. We're really proud of that fact. But imagine if we had a bus system doing the same and it was all integrated into one London-style system. These are the kind of things that will actually bring people with us on the climate journey, because it will show people actually you can have a better quality of life and a lower cost of living by action on climate. And that opportunity is in front of the government right now, but I don't feel they're fully taking it.
Andy, I just want to, you've been talking about public transport. I just want to take a look at something that you tweeted fairly recently in the past couple of weeks. You tweeted this picture of a train ticket and said, public transport is so expensive in our part of the world. This is the cost of a one-stop 20-minute journey, which is £8. To be levelled up, we need London-level fares, except nothing less. And let me show you a response from a Labour MP, so one of your Labour colleagues, Neil Coyle. In response to that, he said it is more expensive to have a season ticket from Croydon to central London than from Chorley to central Manchester. These cheap digs at London are inaccurate and need to end, not least for anyone interested in Labour doing well or anyone interested in facts. He's accusing you of cheap digs, Andy Burnham.
Well, I'm not sure the figures there did add up, actually. I think if you look at the cost of public transport in our part of the world, it's far higher. That £8 ticket, that was for a one-stop 15-minute journey. And, you know, we don't have a cap in Greater Manchester. So you go on a train and then you get on a bus or a tram, you keep paying as a new customer every time. In London, there's a cap over what you can spend. And obviously TfL Overground, the trains, are part of that system. So really, I wouldn't go there, to be honest. Anyone in the Labour Party should not be going there.
So Neil Coyle was wrong, was he, what he tweeted?
The North is... I think so. And, you know, if the Labour Party is not recognising that travel on public transport is far more expensive in some of the poorest parts of the country, then we've got a problem if that's not understood. And it's a problem if, when any of us say we want London-level fares, that's seen as a dig. I didn't have any dig at all. I just said we want the same as what London's got. London's got a great public transport system. We're very proud of it. We're very patriotic in the north here. We want to see the capital doing well, but we want to do well as well at the same time. And I don't think that's a wrong thing to say. I just think generally now the government should be bringing down bus fares, bringing down rail fares, making public transport much more attractive. I was with the Mayor of Montpellier last night here at COP, and he said they are making all public transport free in the city by 2024.
Andy, Craig, I just want to get your thoughts on who's right here, Neil Coyle or Andy Burnham.
Well, everyone likes free, everyone likes cheap. There's no such thing. It has to, you know, the balance between the cheap, the subsidised, and the real cost of things has to be borne by somebody. I'm just, you know, let's get a bit of reality here. But yeah, I'm sure you want integrated transport management. We want integrated transport that works across the whole country. But you know, if we're talking about levelling up, Ramsgate received £19.8 million last week.
That's your constituency,
which is in South Thanet. That's very, very welcome. We can actually get on with some historic buildings that were just going into rack and ruin, give them a new economic start, and to just help the community to then attract the real money. We should only ever think of levelling up funds as the pump prime, because unless you have the private capital on the back of it, there will be a brief footprint and nothing else will happen. That is the key, is to link private with the public pump priming, and that's exactly what I want to do in my South Thanet constituency. And on that, Andy, I don't suppose we're a million miles apart.
No, but I've not really heard much support from you, Craig, today for the idea of the Northern Powerhouse that your party first put forward. You kind of seem to be arguing against us now, as one of our own MPs was arguing against me. I think you've got to recognise that the north of England has been much harder hit by the pandemic. Why? Because people are in less well-paid, less secure work. Housing is not as good. There is a north-south divide in the country, and I just think people shouldn't try and argue against that as though levelling up is some kind of attack on London and the south east. It isn't. It's just giving us what people in your part of the world already have.
Well, I can tell you now, the level of deprivation in my South Thanet constituency is probably on a level with anywhere that you have in Manchester. No, just on that, I'm very much in favour of the east-west connectivity for public transport. Absolutely, fully, absolutely in favour of that. And if that means at the expense of HS2 going from the south up to the north, then so be it, in my view. I want you to have those type of connectivity.
But hang on a second. Your Prime Minister promised us this. They promised us HS2 coming up the western side, up the eastern side, a new line between Manchester and Leeds. We're now hearing that the government is about to pull the plug on all of that because all the money has been spent in the south, tunnelling HS2 under the Chilterns. It's the same old story. By the time you get north, you've run out of money. And you mentioned subsidies before, Craig. Well, London has had subsidies for decades under all governments. We haven't had those. So where's the fairness in that? And I think if you're saying that you are for the North, as some in your party claim to these days, you're going to have to back it up at some point. And there's a lot of people in our part of the world who don't yet
Well, I think the reality of TfL, as you will know, Andy, is it's pretty much teetering on bankruptcy. I'm not entirely sure it'll be with us in the same form in the next year or two. Hence why we're having this expansion of the ULEZ zone out to the South Circular. I think it's a desperate dash for cash.
OK, let me bring in Ash and Salma now. Ash, who do you think needs more levelling up, the North or the South?
I mean, I don't think that's a fair question to put in that way. It's undeniable that the North pays an awful lot for public transport for not very good service, right? Undeniable that funding needs to be poured into the North to build up that kind of infrastructure. It's also undeniable that in a constituency like Tower Hamlets, you've got levels of 55% child poverty. I don't think it's fair to cast London as a home of elites. And to be fair to Andy, I don't think he's doing that. On this question about public transport, I think that we lose so much when we frame it as North versus South, because when you get out of this country and you travel in the continent, whether that's the Netherlands or Austria, you have much better integrated national rail networks. So in Austria, they've just introduced something called the climate ticket, which means that you have basically a flat fare to travel basically anywhere in the country over the course of one day. In the Netherlands, you've got the chip cut. It is very cheap for me to go from the bottom to the top of the Netherlands.
We are fighting the clock, Sam. I just want your thoughts on this. Can the government really level up with the cost of living rising, tax rises?
I think they're going to have to find a way to do it, and I think part of it is going to be having to work out how they get that growth message right. But just on this issue, I would say that I do agree with Andy Burnham that he, as Mayor of the Combined Authority, should have more power over transport. But it remains to be seen as to whether, as Craig says, the TfL model is actually going to work up there.
And do you think it could, Craig, work up there?
Well, I think it could. I would actually point to Andy Street in the West Midlands. He seems to have some very, very good connection plans for the West Midlands. Perhaps him and Andy ought to have a meet.
Sounds like we're finding some areas of consensus on transport, if nothing else, but I'm afraid that is it for today. Joe will be back tomorrow, but from us for now, very goodbye.